So I think that's a positive statement. I also believe that assurance has to be with words at first, because that's the deterrent capability. When you look at the comments that have been made, whether it be by the commander of Pacific Command, or in Europe, the commander of European Command, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think it's been ironclad, the comments they've made on our ability to support our allies. So you ask a political question, which I'm not going to answer. What I will tell you is, the President stated in Prague 3 items, and I mentioned those 3 items. The final item he said was, and we will maintain a safe, secure, and effective arsenal for as long as these weapons exist. And every single year, the administration and the department has put forward a budget that highlights the role of nuclear weapons and the need to modernize. I think that speaks highly. If other nations, I'm not going to get into what President Duarte talked about, because the next day it changed. But I will tell you, we do assurance, and there is a difference between deterring and assuring. But if you look at the United States Air Force commitment to the Pacific region, having a continuous bomber presence of B-52s, B-2s, and then we recently had B-1s on the peninsula are really important. And we've done that now for the last 12 years, and we'll be going on to 13 years. So I think we're showing a huge commitment to our friends in the region.
Thank you, Larry.
Yes, thank you very much, General. My question has to do with rules of engagement and how they might apply to Korean Peninsula with regard to any future military contingencies involving North Korea, nuclear or otherwise. When I look at the Middle East today, and in studying the Middle East, I have read many accounts and reports about a policy with regard to U.S. air power, that missions of the Air Force and the Navy have as a binding rule that missions will be carried out only when there is 0 risk of civilian casualties in the Middle East. You saw the reports perhaps a year or so ago that we weren't even bombing the ISIS oil convoys because we were afraid that the truck drivers of those convoys were civilians. Now, apparently we have modified that because of the embarrassment when that came out. You never hear any reports or disclosures about any bombing of the city of Raqqa. Raqqa is the capital of the ISIS caliphate. All of the command centers, communication centers, recruitment centers of ISIS are located in Raqqa. But why is Raqqa not bombed? Because it is a city with civilians. So there would be a risk of civilian casualties. My question is, how extensive beyond the Middle East is this kind of no risk of civilian casualties going to be employed with regard to the use of U.S. air power in contingencies in East Asia, including the Korean Peninsula? Is this now going to be a blanket rule of engagement that we're going to see in the indefinite future with regard to the employment of U.S. air power? And if so, what does that do to this issue that we've talked about today of ensuring or assuring our Korean allies and other allies in the region about the credibility of U.S. military commitments?
So I'm going to talk about what I work with on a daily basis, which is our nuclear deterrent force, and I'm not involved in what the ROE is in other parts of the world. The decision to execute and launch nuclear weapons is the sole authority of the President of the United States. Those procedures are tested, those procedures are exercised extremely frequently. So our command centers and our operating forces are extremely capable of executing their forces. So when it comes to crossing the threshold of a nuclear use, I will say that the comments that the Secretary of Defense made recently about a response using all aspects of our power, I can't say it any better than the Secretary of Defense has said. So I'll leave it at that on what my role is when it comes to how nuclear weapons are planned, trained, and executed.
Thank you, Larry. Tom?
I have a couple of questions. Number one, what's your assessment of the North Korean capability? You, in fact, quoted Kim Jong-un's claim that North Korea has capability of striking the United States with a nuclear missile. That's question number one. Number two, if you order to wage a preemptive or a preventive strike on North Korea, limited strike on North Korean nuclear facilities, what percentage of their nuclear arsenal, including Yongbyon nuclear reactor field fabricating plants and uranium plants and what have you, are exposed targets? And do we have targets, underground targets, and are we capable of hitting them as well? In totality, how much of it can take it out? Because during the Cuban crisis, President Kennedy was advised by the military leadership at that time to take them out. And then he asked the question, how much of you can take out? The answer was about 90%. Then John F. Kennedy ruled against the military recommendation because the remaining 10% of the missiles can be fired back at us.
So let me answer the question by saying that my role as someone that wears the uniform is to provide options to the president. That's my number one responsibility. And then the president decides whatever path he or she wants to go down. We have an extremely robust intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability to understand what other nations look like and where their capabilities are and develop targets against that. So I'm extremely confident in our ability to do that. You've highlighted one of the areas that's really key, because when we modernize the nuclear force, we're modernizing the nuclear force not for what it was needed for in the 1960s or the 1970s, but we're modernizing the force for what is needed in the future. And when you have a nuclear force, the one thing that you can't do, and this applies to all our capability, is you can't have a haven for a country where they can hide activities and a safe place to go to. That's why it's critical that we develop and we continue to receive the support for a B-21 bomber, and why it's important to have a bomber that can get through any adversary's defense. It's the reason why we need to upgrade and replace Minuteman with a new ground-based strategic deterrent, and it's important that we're upgrading the B-61 bomb, and it's critical that we replace the air-launched cruise missile that was developed for a 10-year service life, that we're going to be multiplying by 4 times for the development of the long-range standoff weapon that can be carried on multiple platforms, B-21 as well as the B-52. So I'm extremely confident that the capabilities that we have will not provide a sanctuary, and will provide the president with the options he needs or she needs to make a decision.
Thank you. Dennis?
Thank you, General. In your remarks, you talked about North Korea testing this year of missile launches from submarines. Now, that is a new factor in that in the near future, not all North Korean nuclear weapons may be land-based. We know from the Cheonan incident, we don't always know where North Korean submarines are because of what happened to the crew of the Cheonan. So my question, as North Korea develops a missile launch capability from mobile submarines that are moving underwater, that could move even toward the west coast of the United States, presumably, how does that complicate the factor of deterring North Korea if there was a nuclear showdown with North Korea?
Well, all I'll say is that I have I can sleep well at night knowing the capability of the United States Navy, and there's a reason why the United States Navy is building Virginia-class submarines, and why the United States Navy is building a replacement for their Ohio replacement program. And since my son served on 2 submarines, the USS Connecticut and the USS Rhode Island, and I saw the training they put him through, I am really confident in our ability of the United States Navy to do what they need to do, just like I'm extremely confident in what the United States Air Force provides.
Thank you, Peter.
General Weinstein, we've known each other a long time, and thank you for your remarks. Whenever I hear an Air Force officer say nice things about the Navy, and I hear Admiral Benedict say nice things about ICBMs, I say we really have adopted jointness in the United States military. My question is, you answered a lot of it, but I want to reiterate it. The Washington Post recently put an article out about the myths about nuclear weapons, which I've answered today in Aviation Week, I think it will be. But one of the main points that the writer makes is that there's no hurry to modernize our nuclear deterrent. We have plenty of time, and we can even delay things because what we now have works, and that's all that matters. And that therefore we can delay ICBMs. We don't need to go forward with a long-range strike option. And you may have seen the article. I wanted to answer that because that's going to be key to the next administration. The challenges they're going to face is, I think there are going to be a lot of pressures to delay doing various elements of the triad and NSA and so forth. Could you address that? You addressed it in...
Yeah, so let me give you the punchline up front.
Okay.
We have delayed nuclear modernization as long as we can, and we cannot delay it anymore. We developed our nuclear capability in the 1960s. You could say late 1950s, but it was really the 1960s. And then we modernized again in the 1980s under the Reagan buildup. And then if you're going to do it on 20-year increments, the next time we would have modernized would be in the year 2000, and we have not done that. So that's why it is absolutely critical for us to modernize the force. So let me talk about it. So the force is extremely capable, and it's capable for today, but our responsibility is to make a force that can be capable in the 2030s and 2040s. So let's talk about the B-52. Very capable airframe. We're modernizing the airframe, but the newest B-52 has a tail number of 61 on the back. And that is our newest B-52, is 1961 technology. The ICBM was built in really in the 1960s is when the infrastructure was put in. The missiles we have are really based on a 1970s design, and in the 1990s we put new propellant in the Minuteman missile, and we upgraded the electronics on the guidance, but we didn't change any of the accuracy or did any of that piece. And the air-launched cruise missile was developed in the 1970s, and it had a 10-year lifespan. So you can just do the math. Why I made the comment of we've already done 3 service life extensions, we're going to have to do 1 more. So when you look across the portfolio, the systems are important, but less important than what we need to provide the president. What we need to provide the president is we need a force that is survivable. And that survivable leg amongst a range of contingencies is the Ohio replacement in the submarine. So you need a submarine portion of the triad, not because we've always had it, but we need a submarine portion because we need the survivability. You need a flexible arm. That flexible arm that is a show of force, and as well as can get to where we need it to get to and give the president ample time to make decisions, and that is the bomber. The bomber's flexible. Hence why it is a critical capability that we put into Guam as well as put into places in Europe. As I told you, the B-52 was built and it was really the end of 1960 with a 61 tail number. The B-2 bomber was built in 1980s, and while the B-2 bomber has a lot of capability today, it won't have the same capability to penetrate that we need in the out years, and that's why the B-21 is absolutely critical. And then we get to Minuteman. So Minuteman, we have pushed off modernization as far as you can, so you need to upgrade the propellant of Minuteman because it only lasts for so long. And when you look at when we need to get the ground-based strategic deterrent and the capability increases that we need to support the combatant commander. We're in the time frame now to develop it so we can visit it in the late 2020s. So when you look at the capability we provide, what we need to provide are the attributes of survivability, responsiveness, what the ICBM provides, and flexibility. That is the reason why we're building a B-21. We're building a long-range standoff weapon. We're modernizing the B-61. We're modernizing and we're building ground-based strategic deterrent, and why, just like Peter talked about, I will stand with my brethren, Admiral Benedict, and why it's really critical for us to build an Ohio replacement. So that's why it's a whole set of activities. And then all you need to do is look at what's going on in the world and look at the modernization activities that were going on in Russia and China. As you have eloquently said on other occasions, there's no arms race. They've already built the systems.
Yes.
You can't be in an arms race when one person is at the starting line. So
With
that's why
all these
critical.
assets, are we still working on the notion of mass retaliation that we used to have during the Cold War, or the possibility for first the use of nuclear weapons as well?
Well, right now that discussion, I'm not gonna get into the no first use issue. The president will make that decision. But I will tell you, we're looking, when we're building the new weapon systems, it's based on what we need in the future, not what we did in the past.
General, I'm a firm believer that one day today's two Koreas will be one democratic, free enterprise, open, one Korea.
God bless them.
Now, if that happens, when it happens, I'm afraid what in North Korea today, what happened in Iraq might happen. After Paul Bremer ran and Iraqi army was disbanded, Ba'ath Party was disbanded, but they had their weapons, and now there's a story about how they gave rise to today's ISIS. Now, we don't want North Korean army.